Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucia Cloonan, and I work in the School of Business in ATU on the Galway campus. So today I want to talk to you about my research into integrating a UDL approach into a module using an ePortfolio, and I'm looking at it from my students' perspective. So here's just an overview of the presentation. We look at the aim of the research, the methodology that I used, a detailed look on the assessment design by myself and the students. It's co-design. I look at some of the findings. I won't have time to go through all the findings, but we look at some of the findings, one for each task, and then some conclusions and recommendations. So my starting point was obviously the literature. So I had a look at the literature, and basically while there's a lot of research out there in relation to UDL principles, there's very little out there in terms of UDL practice from a student perspective. So that's where I wanted to address the gap in the research. So as I say, I wanted to evaluate the integration of UDL approach into a module called brand management. Brand management, it's a 5-credit mandatory module on the BBS in marketing and sales. And you can see my year 4 students there. That was our first day back in the labs back in September. So they're year 4, as I say, the breakdown of the assessment for the module is 100% continuous assessment. And the ePortfolio that I introduced as part of that was 40% of the total module. The ePortfolio platform that I used was PebblePad. So I did a lot done on multiple means of representation before. So this time I wanted to focus on the second 2 principles, multiple means of engagement and multiple means of action and expression. So the methodology I used, it was a mixed method study. So my sample was 56, as I say, the year 4 marketing and sales students. And I used a triangulation approach in terms of the data collection. So I started with a needs analysis questionnaire, and I followed up then with 4 shorter questionnaires in relation to the ePortfolio tasks. And then I used the results, I analysed the results from those, and that formed the basis then for the qualitative research in terms of the focus group that I carried out and the personal interviews with students after that. So the first thing I started with was the needs analysis at the beginning of the semester. So before I could decide on an assessment design or even my delivery was another side of it, I had to see where the students were at. So I was interested in 3 areas at the beginning. The first was there, and other presenters alluded to this morning, you know, a lot of part of the ePortfolio is reflection. So I needed to see where they were at in terms of their competencies, in terms of reflection. That was the first thing. The second thing was what their knowledge of UDL was and what their knowledge of ePortfolios was. So the starting point was, and I suppose I was a little bit surprised about this, I thought I'd have a lot to do in terms of scaffolding of the reflection, but over 90% of them were confident in terms of their ability to reflect. They said they had done plenty of reflection in first year, second year, and third year. So we just did a week of 1 session in terms of scaffolding of the reflection. The majority of them had never heard of UDL before. And in relation to ePortfolios, they had very little knowledge of ePortfolios. You can see there on the pie chart, I asked them their preferred method of assessment, what their first choice was. So you can see the majority of them there were in the bracket of MCQs. Now, we didn't have any MCQs on the module. So they perceived that as an easy way to get marks. But what I want to point out here on the chart is the project. The project there, the segment is 30%. That changed by the end of the implementation. That was gone above 50. So the segment had increased. I think part of the problem at the beginning was they like project work, but they didn't make the association with what an ePortfolio was and the connection with project work. And the other one there that expanded by the end was the interview one there at 4%. And because we had introduced interview tasks and their preferred method of assessment at the end, that had grown a lot by the end as well. So that was the needs analysis and our starting point. I asked them then in terms of would they like a choice in the way they're assessed, or would they like it, prescriptive, me telling them this is the way it's going to be. So you can see the majority of them there want it. a choice in how they were expressed. Now, there were a number of questions around that things that came up. One thing I asked them was in terms of the use of digital tools and integrating those into the assessment, did they think that that would enhance their learning? And over 90% of them said yes, that they felt it would enhance their learning. And the other thing they wanted to see in the assessment, that it was linked to real world tasks. So that's where we kind of brought in the interview, where they had to go out and interview real people, real customers, to see what their thoughts were. But I'll talk about that later on. So this is the draft plan that I came up with to present to the students. So there were a number of sections in it. Now, just bear in mind, this changed based on the students' reaction to the draft, and things changed in terms of number of tasks. Things changed in relation to the weighting of the tasks as well. So the first thing I asked them to do was a bio. So I had done some theory lectures with them in relation to brand management. And then I said, right, you know, go away and think about yourself as a brand. How would you represent yourself as a brand to your future employer? And I also asked them then for their goals for the year. And I gave them a choice. They could either use photos and text, or they could create a video, and that had to be added to their ePortfolio. So again, on the right-hand side, as I go down through them, I won't read them all out, but each UDL principle applied in relation to that task. So the first task was an individual task. Second task, then I got them to work in pairs. So this was the interview part. So they had to go and interview 4 consumers about their brand loyalty to different product categories. And again, their choice was either a video or an audio file in terms of their findings there, and again, to post back to their ePortfolio. The third task was a social media task. So I asked them to go away and research an article in relation to brand management, discuss it then on Twitter, post up the link, and then reply to somebody else in the class in terms of their article. So minimum, they were reading 2 articles. And then they had to go back. The final part then was an individual part on their ePortfolio, where they had to go back and reflect on how that article linked to the theory that I had covered with them in class in lectures. So that was the social media task. So that was individual and done collaboratively with their peers as well. The next task was a reflection one, in terms of I asked them to reflect on digital platforms. And I asked them to do that via Flipgrid. Flipgrid is a video app, and the beauty of Flipgrid is that when they upload their videos, they can see the videos from the rest of the class as well. The next one was the brand audit project. Now, the brand audit project itself on its own, this is a group project in terms of groups of 4. The project on its own is actually worth 40% of the module, but I tied it in with the ePortfolio in terms of bringing in the peer assessment. So once they had their project finished, they were given a detailed rubric by me, and they had to mark somebody else's project. And then they uploaded the completed rubric on their ePortfolio, but then they had to do a reflection on the process of peer assessment, how they found the peer assessment process. So there was a digital badge award for that one in terms of what was voted as the best project by their peers. And the last part then I corrected in terms of the overall design and content of their ePortfolio. And again, there was a digital badge award for that one. So that was the plan that was presented. The student feedback on the plan then, they basically said, look, there are too many tasks in there. So they voted to take out the one on the reflection on the digital platforms. And the rationale for that was that they had plenty of other reflection tasks to do. And the second part of that was I'd already used Flipgrid with them in 3rd year. So they were already familiar with Flipgrid as a digital tool and how that worked. So that's the one that they dropped. The second thing then they asked for in relation to other options for expression on the interview task, which was the second one in pairs. I had audio or video, and they wanted the option put in of Microsoft Teams because they were familiar with it. And I think that theme kind of came across in yesterday's presentations as well. And I think it came across in this morning's as well. Students opt for maybe tools that they're already familiar with because they see it as a more efficient way of getting things done. Mary was saying it in the Minecraft one yesterday. They were given options, and some of them chose Minecraft because they felt it was the most efficient way of getting things done. So we changed that, and we introduced Teams recording in there as well as another option. And then the last thing was to reduce the workload in the interview tasks. So we took down the number of interviews from 4 to 3. So I was aware, you know, in terms of, I suppose, the successful implementation of it, that it had to be manageable for the students. So together we kind of worked out the final plan in terms of what was manageable within the time frame that we had. So the final plan then they ended up with 4 tasks: the bio, individually, interview in pairs, social media with the whole class, and individual reflection, and then the peer assessment through the brand audit. And as I say, the weightings changed then according to that. So just some of the findings. So the first thing was in relation to the bio task. So I asked them which option did they choose to represent their bio. So you can see the majority of them there chose the text and photos. They felt that nobody chose text only. Obviously the photos are visual, so they felt it was a good way to, you know, get their message and their personality across in terms of using photographs. Lesser number used video, text, and photographs. Again, people saw the video as being maybe more labour intensive or would take longer to do than using the text and photos. You can see there a comment from student B on the focus group. They said they found it engaging because it allowed them to put their own twist on it. And they did, they expressed themselves very differently. Unlike some of the previous presentations, I didn't give them a template. They were given the blank sheet and they could represent themselves the way that they wanted on it. But remember, as I say, they're 4th year students. And also, I suppose, in terms of scaffolding, I would have had them in 2nd year for a visual design module. So I would have known their background in terms of, I suppose, their capabilities as regards designing from scratch on a blank page. Oh, are we gone on there? Sorry, I need to go back there. Okay, so this is an example of Ruby's bio page. And again, I would have permission from the students to use their screenshots here. So you can see Ruby, top left-hand corner there, one of her hobbies is to play piano. So she put in a very short video over there playing the piano. She also included one of her achievements in relation to the highest grade in her macroeconomics module. And the one on the right-hand side then, again, I was delighted to see this because this is something that they actually did with me in 2nd year. They're in 4th year now. And this was, again, a poster they had to design from scratch, blank sheet of paper and design. So she had that and she was able to put it in. And for me, I suppose it highlights the beauty of ePortfolios, that they can, you know, work that they have done from 1st year to 4th year. They can catalogue it as they go along, and then they have this fantastic portfolio to show to employers when they go out. The other beauty of PebblePad was the platform I used. You know, I like PebblePad because they can take the license with them. So they see that they can build on the portfolio when they leave the college, and that's really important. But you know, I was chatting to Mark Glynn yesterday, and you know, we were talking about the platforms and which is the best platform. And I'm inclined to agree with him from the point of view, it doesn't really matter what platform you use. It's the whole thing of the ePortfolio and the collation of the information together, and that you have it all in the one place and you can showcase it to employers. But just as I say, the buy-in from the students for me was that because they knew they were taking the license with them, they felt, well, you know, this is something we'll use after college. Okay, so moving to the second task then, which was the interview task. So I asked them which of the following options did they choose to express their learning. No surprises here because they had asked for the Teams recording to be an option. So no surprise there that the majority chose that, again, because they were familiar with Teams. The second category there, the audio category, that included 2 elements. One, students maybe who used an app on their phone to do the recording, where maybe the consumers that they were, or the public that they were interviewing, that everybody was in the same room. And others then chose Adobe Audition. So Adobe Audition, it's audio editing software. It's sophisticated software. It's used a lot in industry. And I would have spent 2 weeks with them, demonstrating to them the Adobe Audition software. But I'd point out the comment there by student 12 on the questionnaire. So the Adobe Audition software looked complicated, so we used an audio app on our iPhone instead. Now, I think this is wonderful because students, again, are making choices. They're saying, right, what's the strategic decisions in terms of what's the best way to get this done? Maybe what's the quickest way to get this done? However, on the other side, other students would have commented that, you know, we've learned this new piece of software now, you know, let's try it out and let's see how it works. So I'll go back to that just on the recommendations later on in terms of the software. Okay, sorry, just on that as well, I suppose the comment that would have been made was they found that task engaging because it was linking back to the needs analysis at the beginning where they were saying, you know, we want real world tasks to do to, you know, things that we would use later on when we're actually out in industry. So they said that was engaging, and it was engaging as well because they had to work in pairs. It wasn't just total control over it anymore. They had to negotiate in terms of whoever they were working with in terms of the decisions for the task itself. Okay, so these are just some examples. Top left-hand corner there is somebody who recorded on their phone and submitted the audio recording. And then moving down, then you have Simon and their group, and they used the Teams recording. And then over on the right, you have Rory and Aidan, then they used Adobe Audition to record theirs. Now, they were, as I say, Rory in particular, very enthusiastic about podcasting in general. And I think after that, he went on to produce more podcasts, not just for branding, but for in other areas as well. So you can see how students are choosing in terms of what they like as well, which is nice to see. The next one then was the social media task. So this was where I asked them, as I said, to research an article and post on Twitter, reply, and then reflect in their ePortfolio on the process. So the statement was the task enabled me to participate in a wider network community. So I wanted to expand them out. They'd worked on their own, they'd worked in pairs, they'd interviewed the public. And now I just wanted them to broaden out in terms of, and we had discussions on Teams, but I wanted to broaden it to a wider learning community. In terms of their confidence, I suppose, in posting and having a debate in terms of branding. What surprised me on this one is it's a class of, as I say, of 56. And what came back from some of the students was, yes, it did enable them to participate in a wider network, but for some of them, it was actually to get to know other people in the class. Now, bear in mind, they're fourth year, but then I thought about it and I said, well, kind of they missed out there nearly on 2 years in terms of social interaction there, in terms of face-to-face. So they were still getting to know other people in the class in fourth year. The other result, I suppose, of that, and it wasn't something I'd consciously thought about beforehand, was they said to me, you know, it's great that we have a repository now. We have over 50 articles in there under the hashtag, the brand management hashtag. And they said to me that for other assignments and for other modules, they actually went back and they were able to use some of the content from that repository. So it's useful in that way as well. You can see there up at the top a comment from student 3 in the personal interview, but this was reflected in the questionnaires, it was reflected in the focus group and the personal interviews right through, in terms of they felt they should be posting on LinkedIn as well as Twitter. And I thought that was interesting, and I delved into that a little bit in the focus group and the personal interviews, and I was saying, you know, why? And they were saying, you know, we'd be a bit more careful in terms of what we write if we think that a future employer is going to be looking at it. So definitely for the next iteration, it's something that I'll change in terms of Twitter wouldn't be their first platform in terms of go-to, but certainly those postings, watch out for them on LinkedIn next semester. So there again, some examples of Chloe's posting of her Facebook article, and then Thomas replying to Orla's article, and then the final one back to their individual ePortfolios where they had to state how that article linked back to the theory that they had covered with me in class. So the final task then was the peer assessment task. So this is where, as I say, that brand management project, the group of 4 were given a project of another group and they had to correct it. Few things here. One, the rubric is so important. So I gave them a very detailed rubric in relation to correcting someone else's project. And it was the same rubric I used to correct their projects. So they said that that was very important because I suppose it gave them the confidence in terms of their marking. You can see there a comment by student K in the personal interviews. You know, there's less guilt if it's the friend's project that you're marking and give it a low mark. This is to do with the anonymity, which is the answer to the question they have there. The anonymous marking was important to them. Because they felt they could mark it honestly. You can see they're honest about the project because it was anonymous. So that's one thing that I think was important to the success of the peer assessment task, the fact that the marking was anonymous. The other thing that definitely was a result of it was, the comments came back through the three again, the questionnaires, the personal interviews and the focus group. And that was that by correcting somebody else's project, they started to think about their own and reflect on their own and say, gosh, you know, could I have done that better? Or, you know, maybe I did this better than this person and so on. So they were thinking about their own by correcting somebody else's. So definitely peer assessment for me in that task, you know, it helped with the reflection. So just some conclusions then. Yeah, overall, I think it was a positive experience in terms of student perceptions to integrating the UDL into the module. And they certainly, I felt, embraced the flexibility of choice in terms of their tasks and in terms of the choice of digital tools that were actually used as well. But the other key thing I would say is it's back to the assessment type that you give them. You know, the engagement for me was where there was big variety in terms of that there was the research to do, there was reflection to do, there was discussion to do, there was peer work to do. And that builds that, and it's been a theme for the last few days as well, that builds that learning community we're trying to get to in terms of them, their class, the outside world, and to get the learning communities going that they can, you know, that they can bring with them. So just in relation to some recommendations then, I think the needs analysis at the beginning is crucial, and I would do it on every module. You need to see where the students are at before you start making plans in terms of assessment or delivery. I really felt that by involving them in the design of it and presenting them with a draft, you know, they bought into it in terms of they took ownership of it and they took ownership of their own learning. The digital tools, yeah, just this was the key learning for me, that it doesn't need to be, now it's certainly in terms of you have to meet the learning outcomes, obviously, but in terms of it doesn't have to be the state-of-the-art technology that you use. Because I felt at the end, even after showing them Audition, and, you know, maybe I think Audition is brilliant because all it can do, the bells and whistles, but it actually wasn't necessary. A simple app on their phone, free to use, achieved the same learning outcome. So certainly for me, a review of the software will be done again before September. And the last thing then, incorporate UDL into modules. Again, do it on a phase basis, one module at a time, because there's a lot of work involved, and there's a lot of, it hasn't come up on the ePortfolios in the presentations, but there's a lot of work in terms of correction. I had 56 portfolios to correct, and it takes a lot of time to correct all of those tasks. So I think that's something, if you're, you know, thinking about implementing an ePortfolio, it's something to be mindful of as well. And again, this was mentioned in previous presentations as well. You know, early on, that was fourth year, but I'd love to see it introduced from first year all the way through. And I'd use different platforms. It doesn't necessarily have to be PebblePad the whole way through. I'd actually give them, you know, show them different platforms and how the platforms work. So that's it. I'll take any questions that you have. And thanks again to the Teaching and Learning Unit. Karina and Jessica do a fantastic job. And thanks to Sharon and Claire again, because when I was thinking of doing ePortfolios back in August last year, it was Claire and Sharon I went to. So thanks a million for getting me started.
Thanks a million, Lucia. Can you see me?
I can see you.
Thank you, and thanks for all your work. You're incredible, all the innovations that you do with your students in the digital tool space. I was just thinking when you were saying about all the assessment, or all the, you know, the assessment of the, is it 50 portfolios, was it?
56.
56 portfolios. I wonder, did you consider having like a learning event, an assessment morning where they all come together and they can all get an opportunity to showcase in a, you know, in maybe 10 minutes each or 5 minutes each, and in some way that becomes the learning event and the assessment day as such. It may help, and perhaps there's peer evaluation built into that process in advance, where all the students would peer evaluate, you know, through a rubric perhaps that you've put together. Now maybe you're doing that, Lucia.
No, it's a great idea.
Yeah. No, I'm just thinking of our own certificate in teaching and learning, and how how we've worked out the assessment each year with colleagues on the level 9 certain teaching and learning, and they present their portfolios, and it becomes a learning event and an assessment day in itself. And but there's a whole lead up to that day, and some peer evaluation takes place and formative feedback. So I think there's an opportunity. It might help with certainly, and we have to be thinking that way as more and more students begin to engage, and we start using it as an integrated assessment strategy. So, but we can chat about that again. Is there any questions, Jessica, coming through?
There's no questions per se, but there's a lot of praise being given to Jenny and Cormac and Lucia on their hard work, and it's evident that you can see it in your presentations just how much work. And Lucia, I think that's not, you mentioned it yourself, we just don't know how much goes into work, but not just putting it in, but then assessing all of them as well. So, a round of applause from everybody for that.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. There's so much work that goes in by all of you, the educators, and also the students, how they really get stuck in. It's just incredible. They obviously love the creative opportunity to express themselves and to think about their module and their learnings a little bit differently. So thanks a million again. I think we're right on time, are we?
Right on time.
Right on time. So we're kind of having an early lunch, 12:30. And then we're going to be kicking off with our finale keynote. We have Professor Meg Bank here with us all the way from America, from SUNY. So we're delighted. And we're going to be kicking off at 1:30 sharp with the keynote with Meg. So looking forward to that. And we'll see you all back in an hour. So thank you very much.